What is urbanization? Urbanization is the process of concentration of a nation's population and its main economic activities in a city context, rather than a rural one. This process began gradually in the world from the entrance of the modern age and the consolidation of its new industrial values, the Industrial Revolution, and is currently the prevailing way of life in industrialized countries and even in those in process of development. Since the middle of the 20th century, more people live in urban contexts in the world, 54% of the world population, than in rural locations, and even future projections point to barely a third of the world population living in rural environments by the year 2040. This represents a significant change from the global trend of past centuries, which favored rural life. It is estimated that this boom in urban life has reached its historical peak in the last 6 decades, going hand in hand with globalization and the technological revolution, which is openly betting on an urban future. This has an undeniable impact on our values, our way of living, and the footprint we leave behind as we pass through the planet. There is also the phenomenon of counter-urbanization or ruralization, which occurs when there is an exodus from the cities to the rural area, but it occurs only in very specific historical conditions. Types of urbanization. From an ecological point of view, a distinction is made between two modes of urbanization: sustainable and non-sustainable. The first points to urban life processes that coexist with the natural environment and the ecosystem, trying to do the least possible damage. The second, on the other hand, does not take these concerns into account, which is why it has a notorious environmental impact. Other distinctions when talking about urbanization can be: rurbanization. It occurs when the city exerts influence over the rural areas that surround it, but since its costs are so high, many of the economic and experiential activities that normally take place within it begin to be located on rural land, like urban islands in the rural. Periurbanization. It is about the appearance of spaces within the city that do not fulfill traditional purposes of commerce, habitability, or industry, but that provide a sort of intermediate space to the city, such as parks, transit facilities, highways, etc. Suburbanization. Also called urbanization by spillover, it consists of the spread of the city towards rural territories due to the excessive concentration of housing in the city, for which new low-density distant neighborhoods are founded, connected to the urban nucleus by expressways. Causes of urbanization. Global urbanization responds to various causes, such as the population increase in recent centuries, which expands cities and generates new demand for housing. Mass industrialization, which replaced rural jobs with machinery and opened up new urban opportunities in higher-paying, lower-effort bureaucratic administration, commerce, and mass manufacturing. Greater urban diversity, in the face of increasingly complex cities that involve greater entertainment prospects. Greater incidence of basic services, and therefore a more modern standard of living. Expansion of post-industrial culture thanks to globalization. Urbanization has positive and negative consequences, which we will see separately. Advantages of urbanization. Cities are areas more controllable by the states. Sustained growth. The growth of cities is accompanied by a greater demand for basic services and consumer goods, which generates a larger market to satisfy. Population concentration. Cities are areas more controllable by the states and with greater ease of coverage of service or distribution networks, given that the population is concentrated in a few kilometers around. Labor complexity. The employment market in the city is much more diverse and varied than in rural areas, thus allowing the development and complexity of industrial, commercial, and service activities. Disadvantages of urbanization. Impoverishment of agriculture. The general preference for the urban life model tends to go to the detriment of rural life, which is impoverished and abandoned in many cases, since industry can in some cases supply its activities, as in importing countries. Increased urban poverty. Migration from rural areas to cities affects their quality of life, since many times the supposed opportunities are scarce and rural migration increases the marginal belts of the big cities. Environmental impact. By concentrating the population in a few kilometers, the impact on the quality of the air, water, and land is maximized, which in turn affects the health of the population and the ecosystem. Consumption maximization. The demand for electricity and fuels is much higher in cities, which affects world markets for raw materials and the adverse effects of available electricity generation methods.